And now I want to introduce a second speaker, Bilha Shilo. Bilha Shilo is a PhD student at the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where she earned her master's degree in 2016. Her thesis, which won the Goldhosch Prize, was written under the supervision of Ifat Weiss and is about to be published as a book, Von dem Volk, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, you will correct me. Von dem Volk, Fahnenvolk, Mittenvolk, die Restitution der Sammlungen des YIVO im Kalten Krieg. And it's a working title. And the book will be published by the Leibniz Institute for Jewish History and Culture, Simon Dubnow in Leipzig. Her book will also be published in Hebrew soon. Billy has published some articles on the topic of restitution and salvage. Her current research is conducted too under the supervision of Professor Weiss, and it deals with student applications submitted to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem between the years 1925 to 1948. And maybe also this topic belongs to the wide context of salvage. Billy is currently a member of the research project devoted to cataloging the historical archives at Hebrew University too. And she was part of a research team, which was also kind of curated by Ada Vardi for the exhibit Ad Acta, the Hebrew University, Jewish Scholars and the Exile from Europe at the National Library of Israel, and this exhibit can still be seen, so go. And with this, I want to give the floor to Billy.
Thank you very much. And I just start. At a press conference held on January 15, 1928, Hebrew University of Jerusalem Chancellor Yehuda Leib Magnus reviewed the university's plan for the coming years. With respect, and I quote, of course, with respect to the folk studies, the university hopes to address questions about the life of the Jewish people, not only questions about the past. We also wanted to introduce a chair for Yiddish studies, but then several questions arose. Naturally, the intention was not to introduce study for that language as a spoken language or as a language of instruction, but rather study of the subject which, according to the Board of Governors' decision, is one required for understanding Judaism and the Jewish people as a whole. The board decided to postpone the establishment of the chair, and when the day comes, we will revive the question of the Yiddish chair. And in my opinion, it is worthwhile continuing this debate in an objective manner because this question is important. And it is not only a question about the chair, but rather a question of national concern regarding the role of Eretz Israel in the life of the Jewish people and the role of language in general. This is truly a profound question which is impossible to resolve through threats and hysteria. In the context of the stormy controversy surrounding the Yiddish chair, the Chancellor was asked a number of questions. An interesting comparison was made between Yiddish and Bible criticism and their place, if at all, in the university. Magnus mentioned what the Agudat Israel Press had written about Felix Perles, the first professor of Bible criticism at the university, saying it was an idol in the temple. Precisely the same thing being written today about the Yiddish chair. Magnus went on to explain that if the one heading the Yiddish chair hates Hebrew, it would be ruinous for us. Every single person must stand with an attitude of sacredness toward all of our spiritual assets. Today, I will be discussing the Young Hebrew University's attitude toward Yiddish through the collections of YIVO, Jiddischer Wissenschaftlicher Institut, which like the university was established in 1925 both institutions sought to serve as Jewish national academies into spiritual centers during the interwar period, Yerushalayim of Eretz Israel and Yerushalayim Delita, that is Vilna. With this background, the Vilna Tog explained that a Zionist university in Palestine could not be, and I quote, the intellectual center of the Jewish people throughout the world because it was cut off from the entire people and does not nurture its creativity. The article also argued that Hebraists are only a blindly fanatical sect that cannot represent and fulfill the national needs of the Jews. It used a double meaning of the Yiddish and concluded, we must have a Yiddish university as long as we are a Jewish people. A decade later, Shimon Dubnov described the cultural dualism of Hebrew and Yiddish research conducted at the Hebrew University and at YIVO, respectively. We can learn about the silent rivalries that existed between YIVO and the university from a report written by Aue-Ben-David, the academic secretary who visited Vilna in 1937 to raise funds for the university. And I quote, my impression is extremely poor. The situation in Vilna is dire. Yiddishists are finding friends for YIVO. I visited YIVO as well. The director speaks perfect Hebrew and their people are working seriously. They have interesting collections relating to Enlightenment as well as Zionism. Thus, even before the war, YIVO with its collections and Yiddishist supporters presented a challenge to the Hebrew University. After the Holocaust, however, in light of the Cold War, there were many opportunities to actually to YIVO matters such as had not been possible at any previous stage. I will try to briefly explain. At the beginning of World War II, YIVO's headquarters moved from Vilna to New York, while its collections, library, and archives remained in Vilna until the occupation of the city by the Nazis, and so most of them were looted. Many were transferred to Germany, and a part ended up in Czechoslovakia. After the successful restitution of the YIVO's items discovered in Germany and gathered at Offenbach, YIVO tried to retrieve its property from Czechoslovakia. News of the discovery of YIVO's newspaper collection in Mimon Castle in northern Bohemia was sent to YIVO in late 1946 by Hugo Bergman, a representative of Hebrew University's Gola committee. However, as time passed, Hebrew University members did all they could to transfer this and other YIVO collections to Jerusalem. And here are the main details. When the news of the Czechoslovakian discovery became known, YIVO turned to the American Authority and to the Council of the Jewish Communities in Bohemia and Moravia in the hope that they would help restitute the collections. In addition, 2 YIVO representatives left for Prague, but they both failed. The first, Lucy Davidovich, spent several days in vain in the city in March 1947, and the university was unhappy to learn that someone was interested in YIVO collections. In July 1947, following completion his mission at Offenbach, Seymour Pomeranz, the second YIVO emissary, traveled to Prague. Despite assurance for the Prague Jewish Museum director to have him join to her trip to Mimon, which was in a military district, she avoided him on the day of the trip. She did not act alone. During the same time, the Otzrot HaGola representative Arthur Bergman, Hugo's brother, was in Prague. In spite of his connection and the military assistance he received, Bergman too avoided taking Pomeranz to Mimon. Thus, Pomeranz's mission ended in a bitter disappointment, while Bergman managed to transfer many collections from Mimon to Prague. much of YIVO's collection were left in Mimon Castle and generated interest in Jerusalem. Bergman reported to Gershom Scholem that, and I quote, "There may be manuscripts in the YIVO collection, but it will be a matter for the university to sort out later with YIVO." Upon military orders in October 1947, Mimon Castle was cleared of its contents, and the Jewish Council rented a storehouse in Mimon for the remaining collection, among them YIVO's newspaper. The F-Shek, Otzrot HaGola's representative, notified Scholem, but unlike Hugo Bergman, avoided informing YIVO and left the task to the Jewish Council. In practice, YIVO never received notice about the transfer of the collection to the storehouse. After several days, Shek packed up the collections left in Mimon Castle and eventually succeeded in removing tens of thousands of books from Czechoslovakia, including collections in Yiddish, which in the following years made their way to Israel by roundabout means. That's what Anna talked about. In September 1948, after his return home, Shek submitted a report related to the archive discovered in the castles and elaborated. One archive, YIVO America, exists in a storehouse in Mimon. Professor Bergman had already made efforts to retrieve the archive to be sent to Palestine. YIVO demands it be returned without practically caring for the materials themselves. If in future YIVO continues not to take care of this material, we can again try to retrieve it. Shek then began to work in the Israel Foreign Ministry's Eastern Europe department. From that position, he tried to move the remaining collections to Jerusalem via the Israeli legation in Prague, as he reported to Scholem. We have sent from Prague 2 letters to YIVO stating that transfer of the material depends only on financial allocation and a direct appeal to the government. The Institute has not replied and apparently wants the legation to take care of them. I have received the matter for processing, and here is my suggestion. The legation will transfer, but to Israel. The 2 letters Shek mentions were not received by YIVO. Since the legation was now sending books in small packages through diplomatic mail, it can be assumed that the newspaper collection was removed from the storehouse in Mimon and eventually sold or nationalized for the Prague National Library. There is also a possibility that part of it were transferred to Jerusalem. As we have seen, without being aware of it, YIVO was thwarted and did not understand the direct connection between the failure of the restitution of YIVO's collection from Czechoslovakia and the interests of the Hebrew University. The latter did not give up and continued to do all it could to lay its hands on the YIVO collections, this time by using Yiddish. During the time, discussions again came up about opening the chair in Yiddish, and the candidacy of YIVO's director, Max Weinreich, as its head, was being considered. Actually, Weinreich was the preferred candidate, despite reservation voiced by some, including Nathan Rothenstreich, who cautioned that he heard, and I quote, very serious words of warning, and was told not to be taken in by Weinreich's answer, and that it would be an extremely grave mistake if the man was appointed. Rothenstreich was not the only one. Simcha Asaf claimed that there was and I quote, fear that maybe Weinreich would be inclined to move the YIVO Center to Eretz Israel, and this would certainly not be desirable for us. This in spite of Weinreich being without a doubt a serious candidate for the Yiddish position, but his Hebrew education is weak, and it seems to me insufficient for us. In November 1948, Weinreich met in New York with David Werner Senator, the Hebrew University administrator. Weinreich asked him for clarification about the books of YIVO in Czechoslovakia, and Senator offered the university's help and claimed there was no progress, even though at that very time the collections intended for Jerusalem were already outside the Czech border. He used the same opportunity to inform Weinreich that his name was among the names of the candidates for the Yiddish chair. When Senator reported to Asaf regarding the meeting, he told him that Weinreich's answer was in the affirmative. Senator added that, and I quote, "I do not agree with your opinion that it would not be desirable to transfer the YIVO to Palestine. It seems to me that there is not the slightest danger involved for us or for Hebrew in Israel. We are today strong enough to centralize all important scientific work of Jewish culture in Israel." Senator did not give up and contacted the American Friends of the Hebrew University and asked, "I should like you to get information discreetly. I had the impression that the YIVO would not be averse to transferring its quarters to Palestine, but this may be erroneous, since the matter in connection with the chair of Yiddish and its possible development into department is of interest for us." In October 1949, the dream did not fade. Neither Weinreich nor senators, who wrote in his diary, "Met Mr. Weinreich at YIVO, who at one time had been proposed for the chair of Yiddish. Their books and archives in Czechoslovakia are still there. Some parts of the library are available for, but surely Professor Shilo will be able to judge the situation much better than I. I still believe that the time will come in the not too distant future when we consider the transfer of the institute to the university." In summary, Senator was not alone. In those years, Jerusalem's interest in Yiddish increased. Gershom Scholem prepared the list of Yiddish newspaper in which the National and University Library is interested. That it included 423 Yiddish newspapers, many of them from Vilna, which the Otzot HaGola emissaries were asked to locate in Europe. Later, Kurt Vorman, the National Library Director, negotiated with JCR and requested a list of Hebrew and Yiddish periodicals which appeared from 1925 to 1930 for the library selection, since at that time the Jewish National Library did not yet collect such material systematically. The interest in Yiddish materials astonished JCR members, and Hannah Arendt asked Vorman, "I am wondering whether all these Yiddish periodicals are needed by yourself or by Israel in general." There is no doubt that Otzot HaGola sought to strengthen the Yishuv and later the young state of Israel, and within that effort to position the Hebrew University as the main spiritual heir of European Jewry, doing so through both its collections and languages. Despite their geographical and ideological distance, and regardless of its Germanic character and legacy, the Hebrew University sought to inherit YIVO in spite of YIVO's Yiddishist heritage. YIVO was a high-value challenge representing Yiddish land Jewry, as well as its spiritual treasures. Aside from Hebrew University ambition to lead the new Jewish world, the status of Yiddish had changed after European Jewry's extermination. Yiddish was no longer jargon, an idol in the temple, but rather Jewish culture, and in practice, ideology that were wiped off the face of the earth. After 20 years, Magnus's words from the 1928 press conference took on chilling meaning. False studies were no longer in question about the life of the Jewish people, but rather question about the past. For this reason, Senator insisted that after the Holocaust and the establishment of the State of Israel, there was great importance in accepting Yiddish into the university, and the language war had no place. In this sense, he had foresight. Senator understood that Hebrew had won, and what was left of Yiddish was important scientific work of Jewish culture. Thank you very much.